So I asked myself if there was any other time in American history where the economy sucked and people weren't drinking as much. Uh, Turns out there was this little thing called Prohibition and the Great Depression. Obviously, I'm kidding because, I mean, I actually had a really nice schools and I'm not going to talk down about them like that. So here we are. No quinceanera this time. And I'm going to go right into just a quick personal note and a quick business note, right? What we are not doing in this video, we're not going to pull up any inflation calculators. I am not going to sit here and obsess over the fact that beluga caviar at the Waldorf Astoria was $1.25 an ounce or something. I don't care. Restaurants were charging prices that made money at the time. This is not about inflation. This is not about price indexing, whatever. The second is I'm not really going to edit in as much. This episode and research has a bunch of really cool resources down in the description because in New York Public Library, I got to go out of my way to say, like, awesome. Y'all are awesome. They have these amazing collections. Among them on my little paper here includes oh dear Lord, where is it? They have a bunch of really cool resources, including like the Bultov menu collection. I was like looking at a menu from like 1850, right? Not going to be putting up any of those images. I want to respect everyone's work and everything. And as much as I wanted to look like a cool channel, like the Histocrats or something, right? I mean, like, they're awesome. Go check them out. I'm not an academic, right? Don't take my stuff at academic value. I try to hold myself to a high standard, but at the end of the day, I don't think really many of you actually care. If you want to check anything that I'm saying or you really disagree with it, you'll look at the links down below and challenge me on that. Otherwise, you're just going to listen to me drone and then say, this guy's full of shit or not. So we're going to start with a quick history lesson, right? About Prohibition, because Prohibition started in 1920 and then, we had the collapse in the Depression around 1929. What we're going to look at here is the Volstead Act passed in 1920 and kind of clear the air a little bit because, I think even stuff like the Untouchables and a bunch of like really great popular culture examples don't exactly paint the Volstead Act right. Obviously, a huge temperance movement in the United States. Prohibition was getting rid of alcohol. How did it do that explicitly? It banned commercial production. It allowed some small allowances for home brewing for like wine and cider and a few things, which were very, very small and, once again, amended and had some changes. But the key thing is that, commercial production, moving alcohol across state lines, and selling it was illegal. Possessing, drinking, and anything else that doesn't fall under those regulations was legal, right? And this really interesting thing that we actually see is there was a huge process of hoarding right when, like, as the law was being discussed and being passed, where people just went out and stockpiled a bunch of booze saying, like, I'm going to ride this out. Additionally, right, there were, weirdly enough, medical exemptions to this. Doctors could prescribe whiskey, but this was very heavily monitored and regulated. Little surprise sneak peek that we're going to sneak in here is like, I don't know, I think like 1915 or something like that is the Harrison narco tax. Harrison narcotic tax, I guess I should say. Comes up later in a really interesting way. So then by 1933, we have Cullen Harrison allowing for 3-2 beer. Who remembers 3-2 beer? There was a time where you could be 18 years old and drink 3-2 beer in the United States. I personally don't remember it. I'm not old enough to warrant that reference, but I've been very aware of 3-2 beer for a long time. And yeah, really interesting and kind of crazy. And then, of course, late in 1933, we had the 21st Amendment and the total repeal of Prohibition. The Volstead Act intentionally targeted the way that we think of the modern alcohol distribution system now. And it did that, like I said, by hitting commercial production illegal. Transit, especially across state lines, because that's what's regulatable by Congress, illegal. And then, of course, sale, because that's commerce, also regulated by Congress. And bam, illegal. So I guess the real question is, if you're in 1920 and we're talking about this history lesson, is like alcohol was just made illegal and selling it is illegal. And now you're a restaurant and you're like, cool, like literally like overnight. Like they're breaking the casks open at the production centers, draining everything. Alcohol reserves after the pass of the act were frozen, right? And the next question you're probably asking yourself, and even in building this argument, I had the big question is like, did people really drink less during Prohibition? Uh, this should be immediately at the top of your mind, because if I'm trying to tell you that there's historical lessons about Prohibition that we can apply to the modern day industry with the decline of alcohol consumption amongst demographics, you have to really take a good hard look at like, okay, were people actually drinking less? A lot of data, a lot of a lot of opinions. Obviously, I think the general consensus is that Prohibition was a failure. In its total, it perpetuated crime. It didn't actually stop people from drinking. 13 years is a pretty big sample size. There's a lot of problems. Thanks for the mafia and Al Capone, guys. And also now, thank you for the three-tier beverage distribution system in the U.S., because now we have a legal mafia. Personal opinion. But I think actually there's quite a few sources that have some great indicators. I'm going to be direct with you, right? Obviously, I'm gonna make the statement. Yes, Prohibition had about a 2 to 3 year period of drastically reducing alcohol consumption for a variety of reasons. The lack of supply, the fact that demand was probably there very strongly, but maybe not even, because a lot of people were pro-temperance movement, right? That's how it got passed in a Democratic Republic. But to begin with, too, right, the illegal production and distribution centers weren't set up at the beginning of Prohibition. They evolved out of market demand over time, right? So those first 2 to 3 years also have like great supporting data. I have like stuff from, God. So like, for example, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and there's a bunch of right-wing think tanks that are like, yeah, Prohibition was great and actually contributed to national health very heavily. We're not going to go that far, but them and like a couple of the other links that I'll reference and probably post up like the titles talk about cirrhosis deaths dropping off a cliff from 1920 to like 1923 for a bunch of logistical reasons. So the early portion of Prohibition is projected to have dropped drinking to 30% of its original pre-Prohibition level by multiple sources, and not just the right-wing ones. There's also a study, thank you for that, there's also a study from like an Australian thing that's behind a paywall or a subscription wall on Wiley that I have linked, talking about like even partial Prohibition and its overall health benefits for societies now and moving forward. So yeah, I hope that you did think that, and you're being critical of this yourself, and I hope that we address some of those things, right? Uh, I also want to model a handful of the decision trees for restaurants to also kind of alleviate this and really put the nail in the coffin on this, is that you essentially, as a restaurant, have three decisions, right? Is you either obey the law, sell no alcohol, and figure out how to make money the honest way. You take some risk, you sell some alcohol, and potentially go to jail if you get caught. Or three, you become a full-blown speakeasy, flout the law, and you operate fully illegally as a speakeasy. Now, obviously, that has the highest risk, but it also has the highest reward, right? Speakeasies were like rolling in money, being connected with sometimes politicians, and the whole history of speakeasies, which I think is pretty available and pretty well understood. The other side, which is the one that probably a lot of people took, right, is they just decided it wasn't worth the risk. I'm not going to jail. I can make money other ways. It'll be fine. We'll do it. That middle one where you kind of sometimes break the law is somehow weirdly very dangerous, because you don't develop the operational security of a speakeasy, and you're not used to plants, undercovers, or what these other things look like. So, in this weird way, that middle ground is actually like probably the worst of all three options for a restaurant, because remember, consumption of booze and possession of booze isn't necessarily illegal under the Volstead Act. So if a customer BYOBs their own bottle and the feds do a sting, you have plausible deniability. You're kind of mostly off the hook in this situation, right? And we're not always talking about equal enforcement in these markets, right? I feel like a bunch of these resources come from New York, and a bunch of these models are really easy to look at in larger cities, because larger cities had targets on their back. I was actually very surprised to find that like Midwestern, middle of nowhere, like places like I'm from actually had booming like moonshining and brewing operations because no one cared. The feds weren't going to the sticks to go enforce the Volstead Act. They were in places like New York, Chicago, Philly, Pittsburgh, stuff like that, right? So cool dynamic, like we said. Initially, without home brewers, without this established thing, yes, drinking did drop off of a cliff at the beginning, and then of course we saw what happened from there. On that note, too, I want to add, right, if you are selling booze illegally and you're not a full speakeasy where it's your primary business, your prices have to be astronomical, right? So you think a normal restaurant markup on a bottle of wine is bad. Imagine what it was during Prohibition, where the guy's like, yeah, hey, this is $3. And you're like, $3? And the guy's like, yeah, I don't want to go to jail for 15 years to sell you a bottle of wine unless it's worth it. So that's $3. I said I wasn't going to focus on inflation, but I had to make that joke. I'm sorry. So, well, what did they do then? Primarily, I mean, they diversified, right? They responded to economic and social pressures. This era marks the creation of the blue plate special. And there's also some shifts in labor dynamics, which I think may or may not be useful to this current day and time. But that first one is diversify menus and revenues and profit margins. Desserts and coffee became massive during this point in time, right? Like there's this whole section that we're going to talk about with like ice creams and sodas, and the soda jerk was still alive during this point in time. They didn't start dying off until like the 1950s. So people switched from one vice to another. Obviously you're not getting drunk off of, Coca-Cola, which did not have cocaine in it by this time. But you were enjoying yourself and indulging in other ways since booze was illegal, and you might have even felt that booze was immoral in this circumstance, right? And same thing too, you can see the explosion in styles and types of coffee and preparations in the menu archives from the New York Public Library. You pull up anything from like, 19 something, like 1920 something, like the first portion before the menu started really changing. You see a few, it's like black coffee, this, that, da, 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 da. And you pull up something from like 1929 to 1931, and it's like, we have Turkish coffee, we have this, and add cream, and add this milk, and try this, and here's a whole selection of teas, and they're highlighted menu sections, as opposed to like one off or two off little categories. Coffee, desserts, and these kind of like cheaper foods became like primary and key stopgaps. During the Depression especially, we zoom in on this with the Blue Plate special. All of this compiled at once with these like economic constraints really hit the social conscience, right? Like it was like shameful or scandalous to be seen, like only the robber barons were the ones supposed to be like living it up and living without consequence in this era. If you're having problems paying your bills and Denise is gossiping about like, oh, well, I saw him order a steak on Thursday, it's like, steak on Thursday? We don't have steak on Thursday. We have steak and cigarettes on Friday, damn it. This is an American household. that social pressure is very real here. And so, yeah, the Blue Plate special became this like utility kind of thing where you go out and you forgot your lunch pail at home, or you're a hardworking man and you need something hearty to fill you up. You've got this economic, like ready to go in and out from the diner thing, and you can justify the spend. You're like, well, I need to keep going. I need to keep working. I'm going to my second job. I'm going to my third job. Doesn't that sound familiar? And fuel up and go. Funnily enough, too, we actually also have this recurring argument. It's Mark Twain, they've got the quote about like, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes or echoes or whatever. But there was like a third place renaissance or something. I don't want to say crisis, because this era, the modern era, is kind of described as like this third place crisis going on. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But things like automats and counter services, which we'll elaborate on shortly, saw mixing of people of different social statuses coming into these condensed dining options during these economic hard times to eat and cajole and understand each other. So it's like all the hardworking guys from the street crews, like in New York, for example, would be dining in the same dining hall as some of the bankers in automats, right? And while we're on the subject, right, automats, these things are cool AF. Like, dude, this is like 1920s, like Jetsons looking like shit. imagine this. And obviously, I would love to put up some of the images. NYPL has great photos of this stuff, right? Imagine you walk into a food hall and there's just a giant wall from one end to the other. And every single like interval of maybe, 10 or 8 feet is a window of 9 meals sitting behind a glass door. And there's lines in front of all of them. You walk up and you put a nickel into the slot. You open one of the things and you take out this like ready-made like hot meal sitting in there. And there's just lines of people queuing for this. You close the door and you turn around, and as soon as the next person steps up, bam, that thing's like back in its glass display like nobody was there. These things were awesome. And I mark my words on this. Take this advice. Is somebody somewhere, if you actually want to innovate something like quick service restaurants, and I'm not talking about ghost kitchens, I'm not talking about, skirting licensing or franchising laws. I'm talking about like real innovation here. Like, once again, history is repeating itself where we have these self-service kiosks at, big restaurant chains, big restaurant fast food chains. And these automats were able to process huge numbers of people so quickly because there were no cashiers making change and doing stuff. Like, it was all really quick transactions to be able to like open the doors and put the coin in and get the food, and people were just done. It was like the peak of frictionless exchange of money for food. Obviously, there's very little service, right? The only service that was going on was the cleaning and maintenance. And then, of course, behind the wall, you had all the production. And if you want to talk about like restaurants as factories and stuff, like go read about these things. They're awesome. It's really cool. And so moving on from automats as this kind of super industrial, super utilitarian, like able to change even the modern face of like checkout friction and menu selection. I mean, just really think about that for a minute. It's cool when you go to Japan and you see all the little models of food and everything. This has your food sitting right there in the window that you get to look at. You're like, you know what, that steak, or whatever, I keep using steak, those mashed potatoes have as much gravy as I want on them. That's great. That's drenched in gravy. Bam, there's my nickel. I mean, there's no reading a menu. There's no flipping around. There's no, do you know what you want yet? You walk up, you look, you're like, that looks good. Clink, done, right? Meatloaf sandwich. Let's go, baby. Awesome. So the other end of the spectrum is countertop service. And I'm going to name drop here. If you can see my shirt very well in frame, I only did like a little bit of blocking for this. I grew up on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania in the middle of nowhere. And Isley's is reopening a new spot in Pittsburgh. I think this summer, I think is what their website says. I'll be sure to drop a link, in the description there. But this place was like magnificent, right? Because we had mentioned third space crises now and kind of during this time, and social mixing and social permission and, the pressures of spending money. These places still leaned hard into the dessert and coffee and all this other stuff coverage. It produced sandwiches and, hard-working man's food. If you've ever heard of a chip-chopped ham and barbecue, that's a calorie-dense. You're not living to 100 eating those every day, but you will definitely have the energy to go landscape. It's all the calories you need for a day in one convenient, delicious sandwich. So, Isley has had this kind of like local melting pot kind of thing going on as well, right? You were having your soda, your sandwich, you were chatting with people at the counter, it was mixing. Isley's also had like this retail component and everything where they were like, chopping their ham and sending people home with like groceries and everything. It created this social space for people to replace bars. You see the articles all the time now too. It's like, Gen Z is drinking less, or millennials are responsible for one half of consumption. Well, bars are dying. This third space thing is really a big question, right? Because socially, alcohol is maybe the anchor or the social lubricant for meeting people these days, and whatever. That really is, I don't want to say under attack, but like experiencing a change in volume and perception. people now, it's like, oh, you met at a bar? That's weird. Or oh, you guys both drink a lot, huh? I don't know. Not always, maybe just in my circle, but it's kind of interesting to hear this feedback from different generations. So, Isley's went the exact opposite route. These counter service places, these local, mid-metropolitan markets were able to avoid the high through rate and turnover, customer turnover, and focus on individual experiences, building community, and conversation, right? Where does this leave us today, I guess, really? This is kind of our second half of the video here. Where does this leave us today? Well, I mean, for one, in modeling the historical look versus the current look of low to no alcohol, the drop curves are completely different, right? So you saw Volstead Act, you saw supply drop immediately, and then, it went from rock bottom and hoarding, hidden supplies to breaking out into illegal and secondary markets. What we see actually for non-alcoholic beverages should probably terrify you more if you're a restaurant and you're already struggling with problems. And I'm not saying that to be alarmist. I'm telling you the truth, right? 18% is the projected growth from the 2024 to 2028 IWSR report linked. So where Prohibition had 2 to 3 years of strict absence of booze, we saw that pressure switch immediedidly, and restaurants adapted overnight, and all this other stuff. Well, we're forced to change very, very quickly. And I didn't pull any specific economic data. I don't really know how accurate like business license lookup and tax tracking, and I'm not doing that. But I think you can imagine it was probably really hard on a lot of businesses that relied on booze at all to lose that revenue center completely, right? But what we see with the no to low trend actually is that it is still growing. This is still double-digit growth that is projected and still rolling in, right? And this has been back to back to back massive growth spurts. You hear industry commentators say that like, oh, it's slowing down. Well, slowing down don't mean stopping. And I'm gonna hit you with this, right? This movement is mimicking other trends, like huge beverage trends, like craft beer and agave. If you look at kind of the growth curve and the acceptance and like the cultural artifacts of like being expected and, customer choice and perception and demand, this is going to continue to grow. It is going to slow down, but it's not going anywhere either. This is not going to be a 2 more year, we're just going to ride it out and then everything will be back to normal and fine. At least I don't think, right? I just want to be honest with you. So if you're struggling now, I don't really think you're going to be seeing much relief in the next year or two, even as the numbers slow. I think that the demand and the cultural presence is there. And I think that this is something that you need to adapt to. And boy, how do you adapt? If only someone had an affordable guide for small to medium restaurants with no mixologists or beverage teams to implement big changes and educated changes and save money in doing it, boy, that would be really convenient. What do we do? Where are we? What are the strategies? What do we see in here? For one, some of the data I was looking at was maybe a little bit kind of old on this. I don't know if it's changed a whole bunch, right? But Germany, France, and Brazil actually are also like these other huge competitive markets in terms of like the growth of non-alcoholic beverages. So I think if there's ever a place that you want to look around for inspiration or market adaptation, those would probably be some cool markets to look into. I myself haven't really looked into those too much. There's other aspects of like French cuisine that I really love, like, I don't know, the French taco and the kind of like Moroccan and Middle Eastern adaptations that are going on over there. But I've got kind of a few big ones for you, right? Fix your NA program, please. I don't care if you do it with my thing, my tool, right? I just plugged myself. I don't care if you buy it from me. I don't care what's going on. Stop charging $15 for a glass of juice, right? I mean, it's, for one, really annoying. And then two, like, I hate juice. I hate juice. Not to get on a pulpit here, but when you juice the thing, the fruits and stuff, it breaks down all the cell walls, it radicalizes all this sugar. You might as well just be drinking pop. And sugar's dying, man. Sugar's on its way out, man. And your juice is just pure sugar. IWSR has this thing I can't find the link. It's buried somewhere on my computer. But they talk about the biggest problem gating NA programs right now is that guests aren't ordering refills. So even, or not refills, but guests aren't ordering another round, right? They only order like one mocktail and they're done. So even if you find a perfect replacement for a cocktail or a beer on your menu, and you put it on there and you're like, great, our problems are solved. It's not happening because of consumer behavior. I think that there are some ways to address that, to adjust that, to change that. That may or may not be included. It is included in my framework, but I think that that's also another thing, because some of you guys are putting in a lot of hard work and a lot of money in developing these new programs. And then you're like, great, our problems are solved. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, wow, no, we're still down profit. Our revenues are still declining. And it's because of these consumer behavior trends where you order one beer, you might order another one. You order two beers, your odds on ordering a third beer are actually probably pretty high, at least in my town, right? And when I'm talking about sugar, man, too, we don't even have the option anymore with like pop and soda jerks and everything, and custom syrups, and making Green Rivers, or like making your own vanilla Coke in house or something, right? Sugar is on its way out, right? Coke Zero is finishing what Diet Coke started. Regicide. The king is dead. I mean, slowly he's dying, right? It's probably more of a poison, or they like missed the jugular, but it's going down, right? If you combine the sales of Diet Coke and Coke Zero, blows regular out of the water. I'm pretty sure, right? I don't know. There's probably a report out there somewhere, but it's not pretty. So how are you going to replace this, right? Because even then, you look at these soda programs, pop, soda, Coke, whatever you want to call it in your region. You look at these programs, they might be high margin, but they're incredibly low revenue, right? So even if you have a $2.50 no refill custom vanilla Coke, product thing that you're mixing live in front of the customer in house, and they order 5, which is horrible for them to do to themselves. They order 5 of these damn things and drink 120 grams of sugar per. That's still only like, what is that? $12.50, right? And it might be 90% profit, but what are you going to do with $9.75? That's not paying your electric bill. That's not paying your rent. That's maybe money you can put in your pocket to pay out, or pay out to investors, but that's, who's drinking 5 of those? I hope not many people. Sugar's place in the market right now, being like on the back foot, makes desserts difficult too. So we had talked about, right, like dessert flexing. Sugar during the Prohibition and Depression eras was relatively cheap, right? The explosion of things like sweeteners and high fructose corn syrup and all this other stuff is pervasive. It's available. It's still relatively cheap. The markup on desserts is usually pretty high across the board. It's a nice revenue center. It's a nice way to like make profit pretty consistently with attachment rates on meals, right? But like we said, our options here are limited. Customers are looking for zero sugar, vegan, gluten-free, whatever, right? Low sugar options. They want protein cake now. You have some options, but you can't just flex into it like you used to previously. You can't like do a whipped Julius something or another for a 50-cent packet of Jell-O that's going to get you, 15 of those and whipped cream on top, house-made whipped cream, because nobody wants the sugar, right? I don't know. Maybe here's a good one for you. High protein Jell-O orange Julius. I don't know. On this similar trend too, about like changing diets and preferences, you guys probably know what I think about GLPs. If you don't, go check out my video. I think the GLP thing is like really being overblown. We talked about the live numbers. I have no doubt that health consciousness and a few other things are changing things, but I think that the real proportion of guests like affecting your bottom line is really low. I think it is still very highly market dependent, right? If you're like in San Francisco where everyone's shooting peptides, yeah, okay, cool. That I'll listen to that argument. But if you're in Sheboygan and you're saying like GLPs are killing your business, I don't know, man. I'd have to look first. The last thing that I want to come up with about the IWSR report and the feedback on, people not necessarily ordering, customer behavior not reflecting alcohol consumption, is that there are natural barriers with non-alcoholic products and brands. Essentially, even if you have the best non-alcoholic whiskey or whatever they call it legally, right? If you have the best one of those ever and you have a fantastic pineapple old fashioned with it or something, that's totally zero proof cocktail, you're selling a very expensive drink to someone. It essentially costs as much as a real cocktail, but it doesn't get anyone drunk. You're inherently, by leaning on packaged non-alcoholic, NA spirits and NA beer, you are leaning on a product that is the same price for less product. That is why they have natural barriers. They do have a lot of great advantages. It's almost actually the same advantages I talk about with people about strong wine programs. You have cost constraints in wine because, that's just kind of the way it works. It comes to you ready-made. Someone else has done all of the hard work for you, and you're buying the whole bottle ready to go, ready to pour. Meanwhile, cocktail programs, when built properly, can be amazing profit centers and amazing revenue centers because you are internalizing the labor and the juicing and the recipes and the mixing, and you're mixing live on the floor. It's very complicated. If everybody could do it very easily, then everybody would be rolling in money. That's not how it works, right? But wine, on the other hand, is ready-made. It's consistent. It pours straight into a glass. No mixing, no fuss, no muss. And on top of that, wines have individual brand power. People will sit down and say, what Burgundies do you have on the list? What about your Barolo? What about, have you heard of X or Y brand? Oh, there's this great brand of, these things are all great. These people are bringing their own presence into your store and marketing for you. These products do similar, right? And I think that they're still very, very useful and expected in this climate for you to have. So I'm not saying you don't carry it, but I'm saying that if that is the basis of your entire NA program, you are in trouble because eventually you're going to run out of runway on this topic, on these brands, on this brand's advertising power to support your restaurant. I think to double back to what we had talked about in terms of the third space and social pressures, constraints, all of this stuff, we've talked about the articles and the idea 2026 and even before this, right? It's a predated thing. Is not a this year problem. Is the death of third spaces, the commoditization of space, all of these things. And I really think that returning in some way to social spaces, probably not always, maybe more in certain markets than others, is a very important way for restaurants to start thinking about what the future looks like, at least for a little while. Right now, we have huge expectations and metrics for guest turnover and guest spend. And I think that changing that a little bit is going to be better. You might not like the idea of a 3-hour sit time, but if people are spending money, even partially during 3 hours, it's better than having no customers in the door at all. And depending on your business model, depending on your size, you're probably open anyway, right? If you're open 7 days a week and your dining room's not full all the time, you should probably start considering that like dead space and finding ways to apply social value to that. Have longer sit times, tolerate longer sit times. Your guest spend for sit time is going to go down. I don't think that anyone, even with a really brilliant, like mine, beverage program is going to like magically make people spend $50 extra or something to be there for 3 hours. But I think that's a cost we might have to eat going forward. I mean, hell, you're paying rent on the building 24 hours a day, 28 to 31 days out of the month anyway. You might as well use it, right? Obviously, there's some complications there with like labor and staffing and stuff, but utilizing dead space and dead time in your restaurant, I think is going to be on the forefront of kind of recovering these lost revenues and profits in addition to product and program changes. I think additionally to this too, one complication that I want to warn people about is if you have long sit times, I call it like the cafe problem, right? It's not really a problem, right? Cafes have been doing this for years, right? You come in, favorite cafe in all Chicago, uh, you know, they have people who come in, they'll order a cup of tea and then ask for a refill of hot water, right? I mean, that's fine. Cafes have kind of had policies and tolerated lingering customers, people working from home because the cafe probably isn't really slammed at capacity. And if it is, good for you. You're making money anyway, right? If the cafe is not slammed at capacity, you let people sit because the odds of them ordering another coffee are higher if they're around than if you tell them to, beat it. So in kind of mimicking this a little bit, right? Cafes run into this issue, at least in my mind, where point of sale flat fee contracts nowadays typically have like a per transaction charge, like a flat amount plus a percent. It's not entirely negligible and it does eat into your margin. So, a cafe will charge people once. You don't leave a tab open at a cafe, right? At restaurants, you can kind of lean into that environment a little bit. And if you're holding maybe a social mixer or different events or something to utilize dead time at your restaurant, you can say, hey, we'll start a tab, and swipe it. Because, that cafe is paying like, 15 cents plus 3% on every single cup that customers go back. They finish a cup, they go back, they swipe, they finish a cup, they swipe, they go back. 15 cents, 15 cents, 15 cents. And like I said, it's not murderous, but when you're in these situations and you're doing financial modeling to see how this is going to help you recover or augment and grow your business, it's a very real cost, right? So yeah, I think I'm wrapping up here on historical lessons and ideas from the Great Depression. So I'm going to put it right here again, plug myself right here at the end of the video. This is my jumpstart guide for small to medium restaurants trying to equalize the playing field and recover revenue and profits for the no-to-low trend, right? This guide is an operations forward manual for small to medium restaurants without mixologists, without beverage teams, to level the playing field and make successful non-alcoholic beverage programs. It's got historical recipes, it's got key ratios, it's got ingredients for you to riff on, gives you plenty of ideas, structure, and health code compliance versus a very, very high standard. I used Chicago Municipal and Health Code. So that way you can handle products safely without special variances, and that you can create amazing and interesting products to augment your revenue and close the profit gap. It is essentially a founder's manual as we continue to push the boundary and get additional extensive market feedback from small to medium restaurants utilizing these tools. This is the ground floor of a restaurant consultant giving you an immediate tool to change and modify your beverage program. Anyone who gets in on the Founders Edition will automatically get a copy of the second edition as we continue progressing and working on this project. And on top of that, purchasers of the Founders Edition get a prorated consulting hour with me for anything NA beverage related. Cool. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed some of the history lesson. I hope maybe if you're having some NA beverage struggles, if you're having revenue or profit issues because of the trend, you get a chance to check out my website, check out my product, and happy hunting. Have a good weekend, right?